Everyone. I'm Cinzia Miatto. I'm the Program Manager for Justice and Emergency Services at techUK. We are here today to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It's very important to bring attention to this issue. There are too many women who face physical and sexual violence, and their stories of survival, resilience, and the difficult journey to find justice needs to be heard. For survivors, getting help can often be a tough and confusing experience because systems are complex and are often disjointed. We're joined today by experts from various sectors who will share their insights on the current situation, highlight the needs that must be addressed, but also showcase some of the fantastic work done by third sector organizations, academia, and tech companies when it comes to VOGUE, which stands for Violence Against Women and Girls. I'd like to welcome our guests today. We have Professor Olga Jurash, Director of the Center for Protecting Women Online, Emma Pickering, Head of Technology Facilitated Abuse and Economic Empowerment at Refuge, Vanessa Rolfe, former Strategic Lead for VOGUE and Ops Soteria, Anthea Sully, Chief Executive for White Ribbon UK, and Zoe. To kick off the discussion, I'd like to ask Zoe to give us an overview of the current state of VOGUE and offering some insights on the existing situation and also the areas that needs some attention.
Hi, this is Giles Hedell. For the last 2 years, I've been working with the National Police Chiefs Council Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force, looking at the threat and the response to technology-enabled VOGUE. Through this work, I've understood the struggles the victims have accessing services that are necessary in order to keep them safe and help address their perpetrators' behaviour. In particular, whilst we found out and highlighted the threat of technology-enabled VOGUE in the Strategic Threat and Risk Assessment that was first published last year and has just been updated this year, that highlighted over 120,000 police recorded incidents of technology-enabled VOGUE annually. We're still lacking a consistent national response to this problem so that every victim, every survivor can ensure that they get the same service no matter where they live or how and what they're experiencing. This came out really strongly last week. There was an evidence session at the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee around the real devastating challenge and impact of non-consensual intimate image abuse, sometimes called revenge porn. And ACC Sam Miller, representing the NPCC at that session, was very frank about saying that as things stood, she couldn't say that there was a consistent service in place for everyone who came into a police station or went online and reported this crime. But that also gives a real sense of where we need to get to and how we need to improve in order to make sure that the experience of victims and survivors is front and centre of the police response. Because as Sam said during the evidence session, we know this problem is only going to get bigger. We know that we don't know the full extent of it at this point in time. But we do know that the way technology is spreading and being used by perpetrators means that there is every chance, every likelihood that there'll be more incidents like this in the future. That's why, from a policing point of view, we've got to look really hard across the 4 Ps, not just pursuing perpetrators, that's critically important, but we need to do a lot more in the other Ps, in the prevention space, highlighting the education challenges there are around technology-enabled VOGUE, how people can keep themselves safe online, and how perpetrators' behaviour can be challenged before it becomes criminal. How we get into the protect and prepare space, so we work more closely with technology providers, industry, platforms, regulators such as Ofcom, their new duties under the Online Safety Act, to make sure that we've got a really strong and robust response that doesn't just deal with criminality, but deals with all kinds of online harms that we know disproportionately affect women and girls. So I want to say on this video that we've got a real commitment within policing to get better at this. There's some great work going on already, but we can't say that it's got to the stage where it needs to get to, the maturity it needs to get to. And we'll be working really hard to try and make sure that we put in place a national system, a national approach. The lessons we've learned from programs such as Operation Soteria, which have shown already a big turnaround in the way that the police respond to rape and sexual offences. We can learn those lessons and apply them into the challenge of technology facilitated abuse. Thank you very much for listening.
I'd like to start with the first question, addressing Emma and Olga, but maybe start first with Emma. So starting from the fantastic work that Refuge is doing addressing Vogue through a range of supporting initiatives, what do you think are the main causes of violence against women?
Thank you. I think there's a number of different causes. We know that parent control fundamentally is the root cause of why perpetrators, harass and abuse women and girls. But we're seeing a real rise in misogyny. We're seeing inappropriate content being kind of online at mass, exposed to young boys who are being groomed, and this messaging around really harmful content around girls and women. And also women and girls now are being kind of viewed more as an object than a human, more than ever before, especially with the rise in kind of AI generated imagery. We're removing the human element of what a woman and girl is. Ease and access to information as well, where young people are exposed to lots of harmful content online, and it's not regulated in a way that it should be. And I know there's conversations around that, but we're still not in a place where we should be to protect young boys and girls online from the harmful content that they're exposed to. And I think the normalisation as well around monitoring and tracking is a real concern. We're normalising monitoring and tracking of children as parents and caregivers of where are our children. Can we kind of put an app on their phone to make sure we know where they are at all times, monitor their conversations online, and we're normalising this. And then when they form adult kind of intimate relationships, that normalisation is already formed around, well, a partner can then have access to my phone, my location, my contents, because it's happened to me as a child. So I think they're just some elements, but I'll pass over because the people on the panel may have other thoughts.
Thank you, Emma. And yeah, you obviously touched on online safety as well, which is really important. And we know that Olga and the Center for Protecting Women Online, which has been recently open, is doing a fantastic job to support in that and to make sure that the internet is safer for women. But I'd like to come to you, Olga. I don't know if you want to add on some points from Emma's discussion, but also expand a little bit on the work you're doing and also on what are the challenges that you face when trying to create a safer online environment for women.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cinzia. I fully agree with what Emma outlined. I mean, the problem of online violence against women and girls, or if we call it tech-enabled, digital, online, there are lots of different terms to describe that. It is a real societal problem and a real pandemic. Yet it is not a new problem, but one that is happening every minute of every day and is affecting younger and younger women. That's what research is clearly showing. The recent research that I carried out points towards three main causes for why online violence against women happens. And that's as identified by the respondents to the largest survey on online violence against women that has been carried out in the UK. So the three causes, perhaps unsurprisingly to you and to people listening to this podcast, are misogyny, anonymity online, and the, quite frankly, ease of getting away with acts of online abuse, online violence against women. I fully agree with some of the things that Emma said about online safety and kind of changes that we see also in societal approaches towards online behaviors, safety of women and girls online. But we also must not forget about structural causes that underpin that. And these are very much shared with structural causes of violence against women that happens offline, although I really don't like making that distinction between online and offline. I think we should not be necessarily making that distinction anymore, as I think it is a little bit of a continuum of violence that we're talking about, rather than kind of bespoke and clear line, this happens to you online, this happens to you offline. Actually, I think the two are quite intertwined. But let's not forget about structural causes such as gender discrimination, gender stereotyping of women, and many of the causes that are also intersectional in nature. I think that's an important point to emphasize here. The normalization of online violence is immense. It has become so mainstreamed, so normalized, that what we see in research is that predominantly younger women start to normalize it for themselves, it's just what happens to everybody, isn't it? There is no point in reporting it. There's no point in seeking support. I think this is actually quite an alarming picture. So I hope that whoever is listening to this podcast actually reflects on that point, because I think it is a real societal emergency that we're facing, the point of normalization. As for the challenges, well, there are plenty, and I think the center is very busy and will be busy for quite a few years, just trying to scratch the surface and move the dial on some of these problems. So in addition to normalization of violence against women and girls, I think the lack of effective response from the justice system and its many agencies and actors is a serious concern. It really doesn't make it easy for the victims to get adequate support, particularly where harms sustained by women online are still very much underestimated, misunderstood, mischaracterized across various sectors. We also witness quite a piecemeal approach towards legal reform and piecemeal approach across policy. I think the general sense that I'm getting is that everybody wants to be seen as doing something, but in doing that something, we arrive at very different and not necessarily coordinated approaches. So I would very much advocate for a bit more comprehensive and coherent approach to addressing women's online safety, and also viewing women's online safety and women's online harms as something much broader and currently conceptualized. I'm sure Anthea will speak about it, but we see, I think, very little that is happening in terms of prevention of online violence against women and girls. I think the same perhaps can be said for, as I said, offline forms of violence against women and girls too. But that limited prevention happens on two levels, both in terms of actioning any behavioral societal changes, but also changes in the tech sector. So safety by design still remains an exception rather than the norm or business as usual, which is a great shame. It is a bit of a buzzword, safety by design. I would have hoped that, by now this should be something that is just commonplace. Unfortunately, what we see is that it is an exception. So I'm very much hopeful that this challenge can be overcome and it will become a bit more mainstream and common practice. And I think last but not least, the rise of misogyny online and the rise of misogynistic internet influencers who incite to violence against women, both online and offline, is a challenge that I'm not sure everybody saw coming, but it's very real and it's happening here and now.
I was going to say, just to follow on from those points, really, that we're actually facing a crisis in the Vogue sector where we're chronically underfunded. Every time we receive a commissioned kind of contract, they don't meet the requirements of what we need to deliver. My team is not funded at all. We have to kind of put together bids and applications to exist. to do the direct work with survivors, to make sure we can conduct a tech assessment, to make sure we can utilise their technology safely, to make sure that they can go into a refuge without fear of being located. None of that work is funded. We have to completely rely on our own ability to be able to fundraise, and it's just not recognised. We have a new government who say that they want to make a commitment to have HARFORG in the next decade, and yet the budget that was just announced has I didn't recall any reference to violence against women and girls, which is really concerning. So what is their commitment? Because they've not really outlined what the plan actually is, and they need to be taking the real rise in kind of online safety and the risk to women and girls online seriously.
Thank you, Emma. And totally agree. From lack of budget, obviously comes also a lack of support when it comes to victims and survivors, which is something that was touched on also by Olga. And it's essential because when looking at reporting cases, we can see that there is also there are those issues are there. There is a lack of support. There is also a lack of reporting. Victims feel vulnerable. And then on the other side, though, we have also the policing, which is dealing with high case volumes, evidence gathering, slow process update. So it's quite complicated from both sides. Vanessa, I'd like to come to you because of your experience in policing. From your perspective and from what you've seen, what are the key barriers preventing survivors from accessing justice?
There are so many challenges, and in a report that was done for Operation Soteria, which was a national initiative to improve investigations of sexual violence, one thing that came from that was there are three main things that victims want. They want to be believed, they want to be kept updated, and they want safeguarding and signposting to safeguarding. You mentioned there the demand on police officers and police staff and their workloads is absolutely huge, but also the whole criminal justice system, from the minute that a victim survivor makes a phone call right through to the end process, is taking years. And how do you keep a victim on board, keep them supported, safeguarded, whilst they're having to wait perhaps up to 3 years for a trial for them to get justice, as you mentioned there. So some real key challenges, not just policing, but the wider criminal justice system. I don't know what the answer is, but it needs to improve because that's not fair on anybody.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Does anyone want to add some points from Vanessa's?
I think if I can just add as well, I think technology does make, will make a difference, is making a difference, but policing, because of the funding, is always behind. Sir Andy Marsh, who's the head of the College of Policing, has said that it's absolutely crucial that AI is used in policing. And I am actually working with a company called Actor AI, who uses generative AI to identify and manage organisational risk in the frontline services through training and education, which we've touched on. It's like a modern day role play to teach officers to have better professional curiosity when they're speaking to victims. I think AI is going to play a big role in the future, but it'd be good to see that really speeding up now.
Thank you, Anissa. Emma?
Sorry to jump in again. Just on your point, Vanessa, in regards to the College of Policing, it is needed for them to kind of really back all police forces, because we've got 43 police forces and they all do their own thing and they're not communicating very effectively. And then it becomes a postcode lottery for victim survivors of what the police response will be. So some police forces seem really invested in VORG, technology facilitated abuse, AI developments, and others are quite far behind. So it's really the responsibility of the College of Policing to get behind that and make sure that they're all aligned.
You're absolutely right, Emma, and not just that, but the length of time it takes with procurement and all those challenges as we know about.
what is your opinion, and how do you think we could create a more jointed justice system, but also to help really survivors feeling less isolated and vulnerable, so then making sure that they have really the support that they need?
It's really, really difficult, isn't it? Right from, as I mentioned, from the minute a victim makes a call, as we know, quite often in some vogue cases of domestic abuse, may have taken years and decades for them to report. And then to keep them on board, keep them on supported, there is a lot of good police officers, organisations, partners, statutory partners, non-statutory partners, all doing a brilliant job. But you're absolutely right, Cinzia, they need to be better aligned together to prevent duplication and be more efficient and effective.
Yeah, so
how that's done, I don't know.
Thank you, Olga.
Thank you. I think we also need to understand better that various forms of violence against women require different forms of support. And that's when the kind of professional trained support comes in. Very often it's assumed that, violence against women and girls is just this catch-all umbrella phrase for lots of acts that can be just all handled in the same way. Whereas I think what we know, actually, there are so many different angles and different aspects to violence against women and girls. I mean, the very basic one is, things that happen online are not quite the same as those that happen offline. I mean, this is perhaps really oversimplifying this bit of discussion, but I think we need to move beyond the point where when we think that, one size fits all approach will work. Actually, it won't. Particularly, I think when it comes to victims of online violence against women, this needs to be really borne in mind. And unfortunately, I think it comes with better understanding of what actually happens to women online, what are the key concerns to women's online safety, and then translating those victim voices with the also experience from various sectors, hopefully can lead to a bit more informed and constructive response.
Thank you, Olga. So yeah, collaboration is also a very key, important part of this. And something that you raised before, which actually it's very important, is also about prevention and education. So you've mentioned something in terms of there is so much more that needs to be done when it comes to prevention and education, because it's really the key as well. And I'd like to come to you, Anthea, because I know that White Ribbon is actually doing a fantastic work in this space, particularly when it comes to engaging men and boys, trying to make effort to prevent violence and build this sort of allyship between them. So could you tell us a little bit more the work that White Ribbon is doing in the prevention space, and also some of the effective ways that you are using to involve men in the prevention of vogue?
Well, the really important thing to think about with all this is where do we go so that we prevent harm in the first place, and how do we prevent this? And there's things that have already been raised that we need to consider. One is about normalization of all kinds of behaviours and expectations, thinking about how we promote equality, and really considering the huge divergence in expectations of what is acceptable in terms of men and women, and those attitudes. So we, like other people working in our space, we're quite a small organisation, but we've been doing really well and having a big reach out, and getting the message across that men need to be part of the solution here, and that all men actually can make a difference. And we are working really hard at getting into lots of different spaces. I think one of the places that we've been very effective is in working with organisations and having a presence in organisations. People spend a lot of time at work, and one of the things that I hear people say is that this is where I've learnt about what's acceptable in terms of how we communicate with each other, the rules that workplaces have in terms of online, particularly on online and WhatsApp groups, and how you communicate with each other are really important. And I still hold one of the things in terms of the importance of this is a conversation I had with an organisation where their apprentices has really been involved in some very inappropriate behaviour, and talking to them was, so we'd never had any we didn't know what the rules were. We didn't know how to explain. So workplaces are really at the foreground of making this change and expectations of how men in particular should be behaving. But it's also really shocking that people are arriving in the workplaces having never had discussions about this when they've been at school or university and having those understandings. So shining a light on that, enabling men to understand and hear women's direct experiences. We have to have the voices of women and women's experience centred in all our work, and then enabling men to be self-reflective and thinking about their own behaviour. And we know that it doesn't work unless we are promoting positive aspects of being a man and promoting allyship and promoting that understanding. If men start feeling that they're being blamed and attacked, then that closes it down, pushes it underground, and actually means that the behaviours that we're talking about become even more persistent. So finding the ways of doing that, I think the engagement we've had with a whole of different companies, with got another Sky Sports collaboration happening where they'll be getting that message out, is really helpful going into that space. The thing I'm very engaged with at the moment and don't really have the answer to is that it's really easy to keep saying don't, but what do we then put into that space? If you don't do this, what positive things in terms of being a man and your activity do you put into that space? When you look at the prevalence of social media influencers, which is so horrific, and what's being presented as normal, how do you counter that? And I think we need to work on how that gets displaced. And how do we put voices of women positively into that? How do we put equality into those spaces? Because trying to confront it head on is almost impossible and probably not very effective. So I don't have the great answers to this, but as a society, we need to not only be, and we must do that, you don't do this, and bring regulation in and bring in all those processes, but we also need to find ways of saying, this is positive, this is how we work together. And always right at the heart of that has got to be the voices of victims and survivors. And just before I end, really need to say how the sector where women are getting support is so poorly underfunded, and not having the way organisations are having to go year to year, not certain whether they're going to be funded. There's no way we can build the change we want to see if we have people who are continuing to be failed and damaged by the system and without sufficient support.
Thank you so much, Anthea. That was a great presentation, and also I think it shows the importance of working together, communicating the right message, but also having the right regulation in place, and then funding is a big challenge that has been mentioned throughout the whole conversation that we've had today. I'd like to ask everyone if you have a final message or a final call to action that you would like to leave.
I can say mine's two. Am I allowed two? Tech developers to engage proactively, and because they want to, for the right reasons, engage with agencies like the Open University Refuge, Women's Aid, charities that are working with survivors that have that research, that knowledge, like the White Ribbon campaign, because it's important to understand what survivors are experiencing so we can feed in, and it makes the product safer, which means more people are going to want to purchase those products. It should be a win-win for everybody. And the other is just following on from Anthea's point. Thank you, Anthea, for mentioning that we are chronically underfunded and we have to go year on year, which means that people, women especially, are on permanent temporary contracts, which means they then can't get mortgages, and they have trouble kind of renting. It has such a knock-on effect, and the majority of people working in the sector probably have some lived experience as well. So it's really re-traumatizing to expect people to be chronically underfunded and never knowing if there's any job security. So it's a call to the government. If you do want to take this seriously, we need longer than 1 year kind of contracts. We need multi-year, 5-year minimum contracts to be able to do this work effectively longer term.
Thank you so much, Emma. Anyone else?
I would very much support a call for more cross-sectoral and more interdisciplinary work, particularly on women's online safety. I think we've now got to the point where we know no single discipline nor any single sector will sort this issue out. We just need to accept that I think we can't wait any longer for women's safety to be addressed. We need to start working together. And we need to, I think, also understand that saying that, platform providers may be based overseas or are not within our jurisdictions it simply cannot be an obstacle to providing adequate victim support and solutions, because the crisis in women's online safety is a global one, but it has very localized impact for all of us. And the second one, I'm just going to follow on what Emma was allowed to do, so I'm going to do the same. I think it's a call to UK government and to other states too. Addressing women's online safety, it's not just a new dream of women and feminists in that sphere. It is actually coming under state obligations that stem from international instruments, including CEDAW, including Istanbul Convention. So it is not just women's dream. I think we have other dreams than just online safety. But it's an important one, and it's an obligation on states to take it seriously and take action. And that has to include prevention. It has to include adequate financing of sectors that are fighting for women who experience violence, whether it's online or offline.
Thank you so much, Olga. Vanessa?
Yeah, I think for me, having VOG as a national priority has been long overdue, and it was the horrific murder of Sarah Everard that really brought this to the fore, and we need to keep that going. As my colleagues have mentioned, more funding, more technology, we need to keep that going. But my plea is just for everybody to keep doing what they're doing and more, get more people involved, more people collaborating, and we really do need to end the violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Vanessa. Antia?
Well, this is not an original thought, but somebody said to me just a few months ago, we need to be talking about this like we talk about the weather. So let's make this an everyday conversation. And I think that's a really helpful thing, and in all its different aspects and in all different places. And then my additional plea to that is about we need to be investing across the board in all areas, and we do have to put money into primary prevention and particularly let's get some focus on essential work with young people and what they're being exposed to and how they're trying to manage things themselves is invisible to so many of us who are a bit older, and that's got to happen. But if we're talking about this like we're talking about the weather, that also means we'll be talking to children and younger people as well. So that's something that somebody said to me that's really stayed with me. Let's keep having these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you all. That's fantastic. Those are fantastic call to action. And we're reaching an end of the session. I'd like to thank Olga, Emma, Antia, Vanessa, and Zoe for joining us today for this very much needed conversation. There is so much more that we could say, that should be said, and there is also so much more that needs to be done, as we have seen, from prevention to education to funding. We've mentioned a lot of points today. To close the conversation, I'd like to share something about the work that we're also doing at techUK in this space. We have a dedicated Vogue and Rasso tech working group made up of tech industry, police, academics, and third sector organizations. all working together to tackle Vogue and Rasso and also raise awareness on the issue. While technology, we know, can't solve all the problems by itself, we also know that when used correctly and strategically, it can support victims and law enforcement, but it's all about using tech for good and also promoting collaboration and multi-agency communication and collaboration, as we mentioned today, which is really a central theme that we want to highlight. Collaboration, communication across sectors are key, and we hope that this video through the testimonials helps reinforce the message. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.